Hey, what it do, YouTube? It's your boy Q, and welcome back. The day has finally come. We've been waiting for it for a little while. We did a whole bunch of different tests across, I think it was like 2 weeks or something like that, for matchmaking. And DBD told us that they were going to be telling us about it, and we're here. The day has finally come, so let's go ahead and break it down. This is going to be for people who didn't want to actually read the article because they did mention that it was going to be a little bit longer of one, as well as we're going to break it down, see what it actually means, and then of course give our feedback at the end. All right, if y'all enjoy the video, do me a favor, leave a like and a comment. That helps us out with that good old YouTube algorithm. And of course, if you hit that subscribe button, turn those notifications on, we can catch you back here for the next video where we talk everything DBD. We've got comp DBD, we've got discussional videos just like this, we've got builds, gameplay, just a lot of fun. Also, of course, down below in our description, we're going to leave our links for our stream as well as our Discord. All right, but let's go and get down into it. Let's be honest, that's exactly what you guys are here for. Let's go ahead and talk about the test results here from Behaviour, and let's actually see what they're talking about here, right? So over the past couple weeks, over the past few weeks, we've run a series of short matchmaking tests based on various feedback we've received. These range from making the matchmaking faster, stricter, various combinations in between, and yes, even disabling skill-based matchmaking and reverting to the old grade-based matchmaking. We want to start by thanking everyone who took the time to share their thoughts. Yeah. Okay, let's so fair warning, this is going to be a long and drawn out one. All right, so let's actually break down into the nitty-gritty. All right, so the variables. Let's actually break it down and talk about it. All right, we have a bunch of settings which can be tweaked behind the scene. Here's a quick rundown of the ones that we changed during the test. The first is the maximum range. When you search for a match, we try to find other players who are close to your rating, within 50 points. If we aren't able to do so, the search gradually expands until we're able to find the match. By default, this is set to 500 points away from your own rating. This is so you're guaranteed to get a match after waiting a while, though it may not be the fairest. So this explains as far as why in the middle of the night, when people seem to have the most disparity in their games, is because the matchmaking is taking the longest, right? So it, guaranteed that after waiting a while, you'll find a game, although it won't be the fairest. The second is an expansion time. This is how long it takes to reach the maximum range by default, which is set to 5 minutes. Then we have a few switches that we can toggle. These are bi-directional matchmaking. Normally, once one player has been waiting long enough, other players can be put into their match as long as they're within the maximum range, right? So bi-directional matchmaking requires both players to have expanded enough to encompass each other for them to be pulled into the same match. By default, this is off. Basically, so to explain this graph here, if this doesn't make sense, right? Because I think this could seem a little off at first. So at first, when you're in matchmaking, it's like this, you're not going to have the match, right? Because you'll see that there's a very small range here. I would assume that's because this is somebody who just started queuing. And this is somebody who's been waiting for a while, which is why their range has expanded, right? So this person does not match with this person because this person has a very tight window. And as you can see, it only covers a little bit of the bottom side of this person's matchmaking, right? Whereas if we talk about example number 2, you can see both people have had their ranges expanded, meaning they've both been in queue for a little bit. And since, basically over half, they kind of match for a while, they match here, right? That's at least what I'm getting from this here, right? Each player's rating is shown in red, and then their current matchmaking search is shown in blue. In example 1, player A's search is expanded to cover player B, but player B has... Oh, so I literally actually just explained it without actually reading this. Let's see if I was right. So it's expanded, but player B has not yet expanded to cover player A, so they won't be matched together. Right. Okay. So that was what I was just talking about there. Right. And I promise this isn't clickbait. I'm actually reading this through with you guys because I want this to be something where it's you read it, but you don't have to read it. You know what I'm saying? So in example 2, both players have expanded enough to cover each other so they can be put in the match together. That was kind of like what we were talking about up there. When we use the default unidirectional matchmaking, both examples would be eligible for a match. So that's what they're saying is if it's the bi-directional matchmaking is not on, this is what can happen. And sometimes, as you can see, it kind of causes for there not to be the most exactly balance of matchmaking, right? Which explains why this is, I think, a better process as long as they can continue getting the queues down, because I think we can all agree that right now queue times, especially in the evenings, no matter what region, absolutely suck. Actually, we'll keep this right up, but we'll talk about the last little bit of this. So grade visibility. This one's nice and simple. We can switch off grades and post-match screens since they typically aren't used for matchmaking. This doesn't actually have an effect, but we were curious to see how people feel about it and how it affects the perception of matchmaking. I think this is a really good point, actually. When you talk about it, I'm actually part of a couple of groups on Facebook, some of like the bigger groups that you can find as far as for DBD. And this is one thing that you can see when people like bring up in talking points and posts, comes up all the time. And they talk about the quote unquote unfair matchmaking. And then they're bringing up grades as if that actually means something. We've actually been even seeing people in our stream the last couple days after like the grade resweat this last time, people talking about us getting queued up against killers that are already iridescent, but they're not taking into account that my weekends are usually really busy with shoutcasting, and then we had the vacation as well. So like I didn't really get the time to sweat like the grade resweat. So we're definitely like with people within our matchmaking, even though the grades didn't reflect it, right? So the grade-based matchmaking, we can switch off skill-based matchmaking entirely, instead use grades for matchmaking. For folks who joined us recently, this is basically the system that worked before. And if you haven't seen it, I'll see if I can find a way to like at least link the video down below, because I think Tofu did a very good job explaining why like the old matchmaking was just really rough. Because like really essentially in the old iridescent ranks, the red ranks, it was like the equivalent if you go to like Paladins or Overwatch, and I throw Paladins in that mix there because people from my channel will know Paladins. We used to be a Paladins partner. It would be the equivalent of like queuing up gold all the way up to master ranks together with the old like grade system, and I just don't think that works. So I think they need to find something. It's just very obvious that when you look across responses since they've implemented skill-based matchmaking, that what they have here just doesn't hit the mark, right? So let's go ahead and talk about the tests here. So the tests were as far as for a couple of different things. Expansion time decreased to 1 minute from 5 minutes. So instead of no longer being there in 5 minutes, so faster matches, particularly for people in off-peak times, though the quality of matches could be lower. So the results, as expected, wait times dropped significantly across the board, faster than any other day, especially for the players on like the extreme ends of the rating spectrum. The quality of matches on average did not change like a whole lot, though some players had noticed like a larger skill gap in skill level. And if I had to guess, that was more on the top side than the bottom side, because you'll notice here that they did say that it was affecting people on like the extreme ends. And if I had to guess, the extreme end of the top side of MMR probably noticed the skill gap difference more than the bottom side, right? Because naturally the bottom side would be getting more assistance if there's a bigger skill gap. Does that make sense? So the kill rates changed noticeably on the ends of the spectrum, with high-rated killers becoming more deadly and low-rated killers having a harder time, which would make sense with what I just said, right? At the higher level, they notice that like that gap a lot more. This is likely to due to players on the ends of the spectrum being paired with more players from the middle. So of course this affects killers more so, right? Because of course, if you're on the lower end of the spectrum, if your skill gap or your range is increasing faster, you're going to be finding better players quicker than you would in the old matchmaking. So that was for as far as March 28th. So that was the first day. So basically what it's doing is it rapidly increases the gap. So you're getting the stuff. So you essentially in the non-peak times, you're getting the very wide range of crazy games that we normally see in the like peak hours of the evening anyways, right? So on March 29th, the test was the maximum range decreased from 500 to 250, meaning that the goal is going to be tighter matchmaking, right? So the expectation is slower matchmaking, especially for players like with extraordinary like high or low ratings, and or like in between like off-peak hours. I would imagine this was probably harder to do during peak hours with people in Swifts, but I'm not 100% sure on that. I wouldn't know about that as much as obviously like a developer would, but results like we predicted. Wait times did increase for players on either end of the spectrum, although players in the middle did not have weren't like noticeably impacted on matchmaking times. So of course they're in the middle, so they're able to find those players just as well. Overall, this test only slightly reduced the average rating difference compared to a non-test day. Though curiously, players on the far ends of the spectrum may have seen an increase. And I think that's just because they're playing tighter matches. You know what I'm saying? That kind of makes sense if you really think about it. If we go into March 30th, that's when they enable bi-directional matchmaking. That was going to be referring back to that graph that we had looked at earlier, right? Expectations were going to be longer queue times for players in off-peak hours, so like during the daytimes and stuff, and players at the extreme end of rating spectrum, but fairer matchers for players that get matched quickly. They did get the longer queue times weren't understatement. Some players were experiencing exceptionally long queue times, 15 plus minutes. That's tough, man. That's extremely tough. Because there weren't even enough players for them to get matched within their region at their skill level at the time that they were playing. And players who were close enough to their skill level would not get matched with them unless they were also unable to find a match. This is really tough. And I would imagine that this is going to be something that they're going to try and figure out. Because I feel like bi-directional matchmaking sounded like a good idea, but obviously it just it did not work in practice, right? And of all the tests, this one reduced the average rating difference the most, cutting it by roughly a third. So this means that the games probably were at the high end, felt really sweaty, but like really fair. Like everyone was sweating. You know what I mean? The killer was sweating. All 4 survivors were sweating, even if they weren't as swift. Maybe even in the sense of in a healthy balance, but I'm not 100% sure. So again, we can see it says that it cut the rating difference by almost a third. That's a huge difference. If you think about how many like matches are played over the course of a day and how you can get that difference down so much, right? It looks like when we talk about increasing the range or the maximum range decreased to 250. And then the next one was to 350, right? Oh, okay. Hold on. I wanted to read this next part here to make sure that I had this right, because I see that it looks like these 2 days here are pretty well the same, except this one enables bi-directional matchmaking. So essentially they're changing some other variables to see if there's anything that kind of helps get you at like a more balanced feel. So here what they're doing is maximum range decreased to 250, but the expansion time was decreased to a minute. So your expansion time is a lot more aggressive. So you should still be finding matches relatively quick, right? So the expectations were players who were already getting quick matches may notice a slight drop in quality, but players in the far ends may find matches quicker. On the other hand, the lower range may limit the pool of players to match with wait, what? Am I an idiot here, chat? On the other hand, the lower range may limit the pool of players to match with on the far ends. The rating spectrum? Okay, listen, I'm just going to act like I know what that means, or if I understand what that's talking about. I don't understand. Is this why we don't understand the expectation from behavior? Is because what is this supposed to mean? Anyways, let's just move on. So anyway, essentially the people who are getting in the middle of the last one, where it was to 250, or were we talking about there? Here, the people who are getting the fast rating times there are still going to be getting fast matches, but they're not going to seem as fair because the pool expands quicker, right? Because now it's expanding in 1 minute instead of 5 minutes, essentially. Essentially, what ended up happening was queue times for survivors were faster across the board, but killer queue times had no noticeable difference in terms of kill rates. On the high end of skill groups, kill rates dropped slightly closer to 50%, while the lower groups remain mostly the same. Wait, so does this say that the kill rates were closer to 50%, as in 50% kill rate? So 2K it was kind of the average, because I feel like that's healthy, right? Or am I tripping? Bro, this is one of those things that maybe I shouldn't have been doing on the holiday, because I really feel like an idiot reading some of this. This test also earned the second biggest reduction in average rating difference of all tests. So this means that the 31st, though, this does mean that this test had the biggest difference other than the one that had like significant queue times. And it's saying that actually there weren't that big of queue times is what I'm reading here. Right? Right? Anyways, we're going to act like I actually read that and y'all understood me. And we're just going to go ahead and move on to the 4th and 7th, because these are different. Or because these are interesting, right? Because it's essentially the same thing. If you look at it, the only thing that's different is one time the grades were hidden, and one time they weren't. And so let's talk about it, right? So the matchmaking may be slower for some players, but the quality of matches should improve because your maximum range for what you can find is down from 500 to 350, but you're expanding to that much quicker because your expansion time is down to 1 minute instead of 5 minutes. Plus, you've got the bi-directional matchmaking enabled, right? So results, survivor queues were faster across the board, while killer queue times remain mostly the same with the exception on the far low end of skill ratings. Kill rates, meanwhile, climbed slightly at the highest levels and remain mostly unchanged at the lower level. The average rating difference didn't decrease noticeably with this test. So it means it's above the 50% that we saw here, while the skill difference was wider, which kind of makes sense if you think about it, right? But I'm guessing the reason that it was a problem was because the ratings were shown, because you'll notice the same thing here between this and this on the 7th. The only difference was the grades were hidden. So we were curious to see what kind of impact hiding grades would have on the feedback we received, since grades are no longer used for matchmaking, although there's a big part of the player base who hasn't been able to get that through their fat noggins. For this test, we ran all the same variables, only we hid grades as well. This way we can compare feedback to the previous test to see how grades affected the sentiment. To our surprise, the overall feedback appeared slightly more positive with grades hidden, right? Because there's still a bunch of people who see a color and a grade and think that means that's how good they are. When directly comparing opinions from folks who left feedback on both the April 4th and 7th test, we discovered the feedback was usually the same, if not better, when grades were hidden. We opted to leave grades hidden over the weekend. Yes, because, you know what? I'm not going to keep saying the same thing over and over again. You know what I mean, chat. So now we're going to go to the 11th and the 12th. So they switched to grade-based matchmaking. And on the 12th only, they showed the grades. So essentially, they went to the old skill-based matchmaking right before grade resweat. And then the first day they showed us the grades, and the second day they didn't. These tests were added later as we started to see more speculation about the test. Occasionally, someone would predict that one thing we were testing was the old matchmaking, and we figured, hey, why not give it a shot? Kind of makes sense, though, honestly, because a lot of people wanted it. I don't know why. Well, I have a speculation as to why, but that's going to be a video for a later date. So if that's something you're interested in, make sure you've already subscribed and you've got those notifications on so you can tune in when we get to that video. But the expectations were that matches would have a lot more variety in player skill. Well, yeah, very similar to the old rank-based matchmaking. We also expected to see the average grade difference to fall dramatically. Wait, the average grade difference, but wait. Oh, to fall dramatically. Well, of course, because we're doing, yeah, that makes sense. Right? Sometimes I read this stuff, I'm just like, what are we talking about? So as we suspected, reports of one-sided matchmaking started flooding in. Well, yeah, we can also confirm this on our end. The average kill rates for this day saw the most dramatic change, yet with the highest skill levels rocketing up to roughly 80%, basically more than 3 kills per match on average, and plummeting to around 20% less than 1 kill per match on average on the lower end of the spectrum. The average grade difference, however, decreased significantly as expected. So I think this is the most important thing to realize when we're looking at this test, because the loudest people when we talk about on Twitter, especially when we talk about our content creators, right? They're going to be the ones who are experiencing this. And as gamers, that feels good because you're winning in very dominant fashion. But when you are one of 5 players and we're talking about the health of a player base, this is not healthy. It's not. And we have to drop that mentality. But I'm going to go ahead and leave that for another date. Again, that's going to really go back to the other video. But I'd love to see this here because we're going to be able to use that for that thing. Now, to be clear, this is not quite the same as the old rank-based matchmaking. For starters, grade reset all the way back to bronze 1, while ranks only reset one color tier. And it's not possible to lose grades anymore. We wanted to give it a fair shot, so we specifically set this test as close to the grade reset as possible to give people the largest window to settle into their grades. So basically, this was to allow people to get into the red and gold ranks to where they normally would belong, especially the red ranks, right? Unfortunately, I think with the rate that some people were playing the game and the fact that they haven't grinded up to the level, they probably weren't experiencing that, unfortunately. But that's just the way it is. We wanted to give it a fair shot, so we specifically set the test as close to the grade reset as possible to give people the largest window to settle into their grades, right? Furthermore, a 1 to 2 test is not the same as leaving it on for an extended period of time. Correct. Given more time and the ability to lose grades, we expect that people facing far too difficult opponents would eventually have their grades drop to a place where they're more comfortable, while folks who are consistently overperforming would climb. I think that's more when it goes back to that video I was referring to earlier. Again, I'm going to see if I can try and find it and put it down in the description below. If you look for it down there and you don't see it, tag me in the comments and say, Q, you dummy. I want to see what you're referring to, and I'll make sure to put that down there for you. All right. Ultimately, though, this highlights a big issue with using grades or ranks for matchmaking. A very experienced player who just hasn't played a lot lately can very easily be paired against players that are new to the game. As we've learned in the past, grades, ranks are a stronger indicator of playtime than skill. This test was very polarizing. We started to see more positive feedback when we started showing grades again. This indicates that there's definitely a strong connection between seeing grades in post chat and the sentiment about a match. Yes, we've all been saying this, babe. Yes, agreed. I think turning off grades in the post game would be the best thing that Behaviour could do, if we're being quite honest. I mean, I personally, that's just what I think. But let's go ahead and go down here. Let's talk about the learnings, and let's actually break it down and get out of here, because I know this is already going to be a little bit longer of a video than we normally do as far as our discussion videos here on this channel. But I think this is a really big topic that a lot of people are interested in. And I know it's something that I'm really interested in as well. So hopefully you guys have enjoyed. If you have enjoyed, you've made it this far, let me know down in the comments below. Now, we've learned that the strictness of the matchmaking and the quality of the matches is without a doubt linked. Looser conditions had a notable effect on kill rates, opponent variety, and also the feedback we received. While the larger variety in opponents was appreciated by some, there was an opposite reaction from others who were now struggling in tougher matches. Simply put, on the other side of any casual match where one player can win without trying is a person who's having a bad time despite basically trying their best, right? It makes sense. And when you talk about the person who's winning without struggling being the killer, that's for survivors, usually, that's trying their hardest and not having any luck, right? It's something to keep in mind, especially because I know there's a lot of more killer-minded content creators that have a lot of bigger platforms. On the other hand, the inverse is also true. Stricter matchmaking brought the kill rates closer to the middle, but many found the matches to be too competitive to enjoy. While folks in the lower groups of skill ratings would have fewer unfair matches, the higher end of skill groups ended up in the tough matches filled with the meta perks and killers. These tests overall highlighted two distinct groups: high skill players who want more variety in their matches, and low to mid skill players who understandably don't want to get destroyed by high skill players. It makes sense because these are the players who will eventually become high skill players as long as they enjoy the game and they continue to play it and there's no gatekeeping. That's something that's very important we have to keep in mind as far as when it comes to the health of the game, especially because you see so many people talking about the decrease in the player base, right? The biggest takeaway here is that going too far either way is never a one-size-fits-all solution. What we had often noticed is how some players loved a particular test because they were seeing more varieties in their opponents, but at the same time, those same tests were also frustrating to a lot of people who were suddenly getting matched with people way better than them. Neither person is wrong in this scenario. Each of them just wants something, expects something different from matchmaking. Lastly, we have discovered that hiding grades on the post-match screen definitely influences the feedback we receive. We suspected this for two reasons. One, longtime players who have missed the matchmaking changes could still think that grades are used for matchmaking. And two, some players still feel that grades are an indicator of skill in spite of not being used for matchmaking. Most importantly, however, we found that there's a lot of support for hiding grades, so this is something we'll be considering as a permanent change moving forward. Yes, 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 yes. This is huge, right? Again, I think especially as someone who is a part of two of the biggest Facebook groups when it comes to Dead by Daylight communities, and seeing the amount of people that continually post up pictures frustrated about like post-game lobbies, and seeing a very wide difference in grades in a lobby, even though that means nothing with matchmaking, this is absolutely brilliant. So what are the next steps? Because I think that's important. I think that's the thing that we all want to know, right, chat? With all these things in mind, we have a solution that will improve matchmaking for both groups of players. We'll be making the following changes shortly: reducing the maximum range, reducing the expansion time proportionally, lowering the effective cap for skill ratings, and removing grades from the post-match screen for the foreseeable future. Why these changes? As mentioned in the learnings, we have two dominant groups: high skill players who want more variety, and low mid-skill players who want more even matches. In order to make both groups happy, we must first isolate them from each other. To do this, we will reduce the maximum rage expansion range. This, hold on. Oh, it's going to be where I have to actually move this up. Okay. In order to make both groups happy, we need to isolate them from each other. To do this, we'll reduce the maximum expansion range. This will help keep players of similar levels together. This is kind of like Star Wars, isn't it, chat? Reducing the number of one-sided matches. The majority of players fall in the middle of the spectrum, so there's still plenty of people to match with. Additionally, since it seems, you know what, I'm not going to read this all. Yeah, I'm not going to read this all. Let me just read this real quick. I'm going to leave this on the screen if anybody does want to read this. I think this is where we just kind of talk about the end-all be-all feedback, right? All right, so I want to hit on a couple of points here because I want to make sure that I've got this right. So they're wanting to make sure they're hitting both of the groups that are mentioned at the top of the screen happy, right? The high skill players who want more variety, and the low mid skill players who want more even matchmaking. So essentially what's happening here is they want to make sure that they, one, want to help out the high skill feel as far as like high MMR. And I think this is to try and break up some of like the stale meta feel that you feel on both sides of matchmaking here. So essentially, we've all known about this cap that they have for skill ratings. And even though your cap can technically go beyond what's used for the matchmaking, like your skill rating can still go beyond that, the cap is going to be what's used for the matchmaking purposes. And I'm guessing that just means at the higher points of the day, they might have to scale that cap just a little bit, but it's going to basically bring in a little bit more variety into the point of you can still get people at a significantly lower overall rating because you're both beyond that cap point, if that makes sense. By lowering the cap, they're able to expand the pools of players. So this is going to result in faster matchmaking times, which should also result in a little bit of that variety for people as well, right? And I think the most important thing that we see here that I think that we need to really focus on is the fact that they're removing grades from the post-match screen. I have been saying from day one, I mean, anyone will tell you, I have literally been saying from day one that is something that they've been needing to do. And I'm happy to see that Behaviour is taking things like that into consideration when they continue to work through their matchmaking process, because I know that this thing isn't anywhere close to being done. They mentioned, right, like it's a work in progress, and it's just going to be what it is. Us in the player base, we have to realize that a healthy matchmaking is what's going to help continue, not only sustain the community, but actually continue to help it grow, because the game has come so far over the last couple years, and there's a lot of people who haven't gotten to see like what it is now and the product that is. They've left the game before they really even got to give it a chance, and part of it is because matchmaking sucked. And whether it be like when the matchmaking tests first, or the MMR first started and people say that sucked, or the old matchmaking that also was kind of garbage, if we're being perfectly honest. We have to find something that works and that's healthy for like everyone across the community. And there's one thing that we can take away from the test. There were a couple of ones where they noticed that there was a very big significant difference at the highest skill level. And to think that the highest killers in matchmaking will consistently be seeing like 80% kill rates. Look, I know a lot of people might not think that like comp DBD is like this big thing or think that comp DBD is a meme, but come watch some of the best players in the game and see how consistently they 4K. I'm telling you, it ain't 40%. And if you think that the killer pool versus the best survivor pool should be that way, I think this is where we have to have those very fair and honest conversations when it comes to what a healthy matchmaking looks like. But I know this video's already ran like really long, a lot longer than most of my discussion videos do over on this channel. If you guys enjoyed the content, feel free to leave a like and a comment down below, or even if you feel like some of the things I've said were wrong, definitely feel free to leave those comments down there below as well. I'll try and talk them with Leak. Let's like keep them healthy though. You know what I mean? Like let's not like go throwing like, you know, let's keep it civil. Let's be adults, you know, and we'll talk about it down in the comments. Also down in the description below, I'll be leaving my personal links for my stream as well as my Discord. Feel free to pull up anytime. Come say what's up. All right. Until we catch y'all back over here on YouTube though, don't forget, with everything crazy going on in the world today, be true, be you, be sincere, game hard and love hard. All right, y'all? It's your boy Q, signing out.
If you ain't show something, you just don't wanna be. You wanna be me, but you will never be as fresh as see you in.